I'm Councillor James Caston and I'm chairing the meeting today. May I first remind you of some domestic arrangements. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones and laptops are on silent. We'll be using the e-voting for this meeting, and apart from the minutes. The we don't actually have any members of the public at this meeting, so I'll go on straight to the fire alarm. Please leave the building immediately via the fire exit and make your way to the Alderman Park, which has changed from last time. It used to be the football ground, but I think that's due to the building work going on. So follow the signs directing you to fire exits. Do not enter the atrium. If you are in the atrium at the time of the alarm, please follow signs to the nearest fire exit. Use the stairs and not the lifts. Do not re-enter the building until it's safe to do so. And I'll start with the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We've got quite a few apologies this morning. So we've got apologies from Councillors McLaren, Wyman, Clover, Patchett, Baker and Piper. And we have Councillor Isabel Rees substituting for Councillor Paul Clover and Councillor David Bradbury substituting for Councillor Ross Piper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, to receive declarations of pecuniary, other registrable and non-registrable interests by members. Are there any to declare? Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my wife is a private landlord, but doesn't operate within the area of either Mid-Suffolk or Babergh, so I think I can take part in the meeting.
Oh, okay, thank you. And for transparency, I'm a private landlord as well. Councillor Rees. And Councillor Rees. Councillor Grandon. Not in the district, okay. Have we got that? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 3, JOS 26.6, to confirm the minutes of the joint meeting held on the 13th of July 2026. Are there any issues in regards to the accuracy of those meetings? So, could I have a proposer for them? Councillor Carruthers and a seconder. Councillor Rowe. Do you want to do that by a show of hands? Yeah, all in favour? So that's, yeah, and is that an abstention? Yeah. Yeah, so that's carried. Thank you. Item 4, to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Item 5, questions by the public.
None received.
Item 6, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the main part of this meeting, which is item 7, JOS 26.7, Housing Solutions Annual Report. We have Kerry, do you want to introduce yourselves and your positions, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kerry Theobald. I'm the Director of Housing.
Hi, I'm Emma Ainsworth. I'm the Head of Housing Solutions.
Hi, I'm Councillor Ruth Hendry, Cabinet Member for Housing for Babergh.
Wonderful. Is there a plan to introduce this paper? Yes, Councillor Hendry.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be bringing this report to ONS today. It's the Housing Solutions Annual Report for 25-26. This was requested by a previous Overview and Scrutiny Committee who said they'd like to learn a little bit more about the role of housing solutions and see some figures about temporary accommodation and homelessness. So we've decided to do this as a separate report away from the Council House Assurance report, as obviously Housing Solutions comes under the General Fund. I was going to write an introduction, but when I was reading through the report, if you look at pages 18 and 19 of this report, I think it sets out very clearly the scope of this report. It tells councillors how housing solutions helped residents this year, whether services are performing well, where money is being spent, what risks need attention, and what decisions members may need to make. I think this report really shows the breadth of what housing solutions actually covers. It's so much more than just temporary accommodation and homelessness. We've got aids and adaptations, we've got prevention. So I hope that you agree with me that I think this is a very clear, easy to read report. We do have 6 things here as well that members need to know, and I think these are really important. We've got prevention is working, but demand isn't falling. We do a great job of prevention here at Babergh and Mid-Suffolk, I feel, but demand is structural and rising, and that is constantly a pressure on housing solutions. We've got 74 households in B&B at the time of this report. That to me is a shocking figure, but it does reflect the national statistics. Not only does it come at a huge cost to both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk, we're looking at £5 million a year for B&B accommodation over the 2 councils. But that's 74 households that don't have a home, not even a temporary home. They are literally living in bed and breakfast and hotel accommodation. And I can only imagine how upsetting that is for the households that are facing that. We've got the Renters' Rights Act. I think everybody's aware of how much that has affected the need for people seeking our help with housing. Central Suffolk lettings. There's a bit of a gap there. Some of the landlords are dropping out of the scheme. It's something that we've really relied on to try and prevent homelessness. We have, however, secured nearly £80,000 for residents who didn't know they were owed it. The tenancy sustainment team do a great job in trying to keep people in their homes. Sometimes people aren't aware that there's benefits they can claim, so the tenancy sustainment team works with them to try and keep them in their properties. And also there's a mismatch between what we're building and what people need. And I think some people will be shocked to see that the highest demand is actually for 1-bedroom properties. We're so focused, I think, on trying to source larger houses for families that we forget that there's a whole demand for 1-bedroom properties, and it's something that we're really struggling to get affordable housing. The developers aren't particularly keen on building it. So there's a whole load of issues here today, and I really hope we get some questions. I think it's important that we understand the causes of these figures, and that's the only way we're really going to make a difference in trying to do better for our residents. So I really look forward to everybody's questions.
Thank you very much. And if anyone's watching, for those that are watching at home, these papers are on the website under committees. So we'll go into questions. Would anyone like to start off by asking a question? Councillor Grandin.
Thank you. Yes, I was very interested and surprised to see that there's a great demand for single bedroom homes. And I suppose when you think further, then you can see, well, yes, with divorces and changes in lifestyle and that kind of thing, you then think, oh, well, yes, I suppose there must be a demand. But it's how we deal with it. And I wondered whether the councils have considered investing more or looking more at houses of multiple occupancy for this situation, much as many of us probably lived in house shares when, it's the various stages in our lives. And people are living in house shares to a much later age now in the private sector. And the other thing linked to that, I know of at least 2 houses, council-owned houses, in my road, where one person's living in a 3-bedroomed house, and I'm sure there are more, they're just who I happen to know about, they could become houses of multiple occupancy with 3 separate single people living in them and sharing the kitchen and bathroom and so on. Has that been considered, or that sort of situation been considered? Thank you.
Shall I answer that question? What I would say is, in terms of HMOs, we are looking to do some work on that. We have done some really great work with empty homes in Central Suffolk Lettings, bringing back 4 HMO units that we've been using through Central Suffolk Lettings at the moment. So we are looking at opportunities that arise, and we will work with landlords, and often we try and do it in such a way that we can discharge our homelessness duty. But yeah, a significant number of people in our hotels that currently at the moment, we've got 71 singles in our hotels and 4 families in our hotels. A large majority of our client group coming through as homeless tend to be single people coming through the door. So yes, and you're right, Councillor Grandon, there has been a change in demographics in households, with changes in households with relationship breakdowns and the way that people live nowadays. So we are working on that. When it comes to council tenancies, they're secure tenancies, so you can't force people to move. But we're looking at right sizing, downsizing options that our head of housing management is looking at the moment, to see what we can do to support residents to move properties when the home is no longer right for their needs. So we're working on that. In terms of a local authority having HMOs, that's really difficult because of the type of tenancies we can issue, and it just doesn't work for us. But I think what we will continue to do is to work with the private sector landlords to try and create more opportunities for HMOs to be delivered.
Thank you. And on that, the B&Bs, individuals in B&Bs, how often do we review their case and look at exactly what's holding things up? Do we do that at a certain time, or is that something that you're always looking at?
It's something we're constantly looking at. What happens is everyone who goes into any form of temporary accommodation has a risk assessment done, so we can understand what their needs are, what support needs are, and where we should be really trying to place them. When they go into temporary accommodation, we have resettlement officers that will do a support plan with everyone to see what they need to move on to the next stage of accommodation. Obviously, we try and get people out as quickly as possible, but with the increased demand, that's proving a lot more difficult at the moment. But what I can say is the temporary accommodation team have done a really good job last week, and we did 30 moves across TA. That's people going in and out of TA, people moving around TA, which was a testament to their work, because obviously we don't really want people in temporary accommodation longer than we have to, and especially in hotel accommodation. So we're constantly reviewing that. So that's a constant thing that's reviewed by the TA team, by the housing solutions officers as well.
Thank you. Was that Councillor Rees? Councillor Scarf, you were before Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around Central Suffolk Lettings. I've got a number of other questions, but I'll start with this one. A few years ago, I can remember at this committee that Central Suffolk Lettings was seen to be a real success and actually a very innovative way of delivering a solution to a real problem that we had. What do you feel we could do to change Central Suffolk Lettings to reverse the decline in landlords, which is understandable for a number of reasons, but also more incentivise landlords to actually join the scheme? Because Central Suffolk Lettings does give landlords an element of security in terms of their tenants and what they can expect, and guaranteed rent, etc. It mentions somewhere in the paper a potential for a rent uplift, if you like, a market supplement to the local housing authority allowance. But what do you think we could do to move forward to actually try and reverse this decline? Because the decline is quite rapid, and within a few years we may not have many landlords left within CSL.
What we've managed to do is we had to rejig our offer to the landlords due to the Renters' Rights Act, because that Section 21 was abolished, so we had to look at how we were able to end tenancies as part of the scheme. So our offering changed, and also obviously landlords decided to leave the market as well. We already offer an uplift to the LHA rate. It will depend on a case-by-case situation. What we are looking at is if we can do some more innovative things with landlords. So we're looking at how we can work much better with the empty homes team to sort of be more innovative, because we've got some really good outcomes from that in the past as well. We're sort of looking at what does our offer look like to landlords in that sense, and where are the opportunities. So we're doing a piece of work of looking at being smarter around data, around where is the need for housing, and then looking at overlaying that with empty homes data, and then seeing if there are opportunities there. And some of the decline is due to the fact that because of the uncertainty of the Renters' Rights Act, we probably weren't as proactive as we normally are. So we're, now that that's sort of settled a little bit, we're going back out to market, sort of refreshing everything, letting people know that we're here as a service and getting people back on board. The team are working on some options that are available to us to see what we can do in terms of practices and offers to landlords. So we're still working on that, councillor staff. But yes, for us, it generally brings about a quarter of our lets for preventing and relieving homelessness. So it's a very big part of our offer in terms of preventing homelessness. So we're keen to sort of turn around the decline as well.
Thank you. Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair. One of the questions I have is, to what extent is there a hold-up with rehousing people because of our empty homes? I recall in my ward there have been homes that were empty after fire and other things. What is the what are we doing to, at the moment, get rid of the backlog of empty homes in the district? I'm thinking of Babergh, obviously, and so that those people, what is the correlation and what is being done to bring those two things together?
There is a piece of work happening at the moment where, you mean our void properties in terms of our council properties, how are we turning those around quicker? We've onboarded additional contractors. We are working as much as we can in terms of, we've changed the way we've done some of the work. So we're now not advertising properties until we'll know that they're a month away from being almost ready. So there isn't that too much of a time lag in terms of letting the properties, because initially, as soon as we were notified the property was void, we would automatically get all the information we needed and then advertise it. But that doesn't tell you how long it's going to take to do the work. So what we've done is we're now not advertising the property until we know it's almost ready. So that shortens the time in terms of turning it around. But there is a piece of work going on behind the scenes between building services and housing management to relook at that voids process to sort of make it more efficient and effective. I don't know if Kerry has anything he wants to add to that.
Sorry, can I just add to that as well that the tenant board are currently undertaking a scrutiny project on voids. That's in progress at the moment. So we're very much listening to their feedback on that. It's very difficult as well trying to balance. We're trying to use the opportunity for a property to become void to make sure, obviously, we've got the decent homes standard, and we've had some dissatisfaction with the condition that some of our properties have been let out in. So it's trying to find that good balance between getting the properties turned around quickly and making sure that they are up to the standard that we would like them to be when they're re-let. So this is, as I say, hopefully Tenant Board will have the results of that consultation and their piece of scrutiny on that, and that should come before ONS as well. So, okay.
May I come back on that, please? Thank you. Following on from that, then, is there not a case for having some work left until until the property is re-let? and so that things come to a specific standard first, and then with other things that can be carried out once somebody's moved in. Because as far as, you know, when you're homeless, you want somewhere, you want a roof, and to some extent you don't care what the condition is as long as you've got somewhere. And so surely there can be a standard, an ideal, this is what we aspire to for the standard for letting, and we can bring it down and say, here's the initial standard, and then anything else can wait till later. Is there no scope for that now? Sorry if I'm overlapping. Sorry, Emma.
I think sometimes we do works in occupation, however, it's not ideal, because we've often found that leads to even more dissatisfaction from residents, because they've moved in, and you have to think of it this way: when we let a property, it's that resident's first interaction with us as their landlord, and you obviously always want to really give a good account, and you always want to give somebody a good, decent quality home to move into, because I think that says something about how we feel about them as residents. Obviously, there's always a balance to be struck, and I think it depends on what works that you're talking about doing. So if it's not intrusive, then that is definitely taken into consideration. But if it's going to be quite intrusive and it makes more sense to do it before the tenant moves in, I think we'd rather do that. And what the focus of the team have really been, because as Ruth said, there's been a level of dissatisfaction about the quality of the homes that we let in the past. So what we've focused on is actually, let's get the basics right, let's get it to a standard. But there are times where if it's something really minor, then we would do that in occupation. So it will always be down to a judgment call.
Thank you. Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are about phase 2 acquisition, and I'm sort of struggling to get my head around it, really. Firstly, in the report it talks about phase 1 local authority housing fund, that 8 units were delivered. So will the local authority housing fund pay for phase 2? And the second part of the question is that I'm aware that Mid Suffolk has an ambition to invest £5 million in phase 2 acquisition. I'm a Babergh councillor, so I don't really understand what's happening in Babergh, and whether anyone can you let me know? Thank you.
Yes, obviously we've got the temporary accommodation project. We brought a paper to Cabinet, I believe, last August, and that was to acquire 30 units across both districts for temporary accommodation. We had secured local authority housing funding in both districts, Babergh and Mid, and we have also used in Babergh some community sums to fund match that in that perspective. So in Babergh, so far we've been able to secure 8 units, and that sort of brought that to the end, because that exhausted the use of all the LAF funding and the community sums that we had set aside for this. And so that's what we're doing. We're obviously going to look at different ways of looking at TA provision in Babergh, but that will be down to funding and how we're able to fund that, obviously. And in terms of Mid, we've used the LAF funding and the £5 million that we've got from the general fund, and we've secured, it was 6 from the initial phase 1 in Mid, and those were mostly street properties. And in phase 2, we've managed to secure 12 additional units of properties that we're in the process of acquiring from a developer. So that's what we're doing. But so in terms of Babergh, although phase 1 has concluded and that's the end of it, we're still looking at what other opportunities are available to us to secure more accommodation and where we can get additional funding from at the moment. So it's a work in progress always, and if there are opportunities, if there are funding opportunities, we'll definitely look at that and explore that. So we're not closing the book, we're just looking at what our options are and trying to be smart with the money that we have available to us.
Councillor Rowe, please.
I've got a couple of questions. One bit about the HMOs, of like how viable are they really, like, because they tend to be quite temporary, like people then move on to other places, and that also requires a certain amount of money if people need to pay deposits and stuff. So I was wondering whether that actually does end up being a solution, or whether that just kind of shoved it down the road a little bit. And also, how much is people's experience of being landlord, not the money side, but just kind of, there's a whole mix of tenants, but someone can have like one bad experience and then that can thoroughly put them off, and can also create situations where they get into debt if there's like they're having to pay service charges, for example, on properties that then they're not letting out through council scheme anymore. So yeah, how much has that been an issue?
Okay. With HMOs, with any accommodation apartment sector, we will help with deposits to help people secure the property. One good outcome I've got from the HMOs, especially one that we secured through Central Suffolk Lettings and Empty Homes, is a young man who went into the HMO, stayed there for about 2 years, and after 2 years he was able to get himself a job, save up enough money, and he actually bought his own home. He was able to buy a property. So I think it can have really, really good positive outcomes to help people to sort of start their lives. And what we found is, because anyone under 35 is subject to the shared room rate, which means they won't be able to, if you're on a low income or you're on benefits, you're not able to afford a one-bedroom self-contained property. They only help you to cover the cost of a shared room in a shared house. So there's a huge cohort of people from 18 to 35, unless you are a former care leaver or someone that might be exempt from it, then it's definitely worthwhile. And for us, we've seen some real positives for people being able to move on with their lives. Sort of, they stay there for a period of time. So 2 years is a substantial amount of time, and then move on to something else. So it's been a really positive thing for us that we've seen people really turn around their lives and rebuild their lives, and move forward. So the HMOs are definitely for us a positive thing and a really good solution, and it helps with that sort of housing pathway that you really want to build to help people move forward. So that for us it's a positive thing. And how do people's lived experiences reflecting? For us as a service, we constantly do exit surveys with our residents in TA and ask them how they have experienced it, and that's one of the reasons why all our TA is furnished. We always have we're not expecting people to furnish with their own properties. We will listen to individual needs and requirements. So a lot of the hotels that we use, so like hotels like the Cedars, we've managed to talk to them and we're able to get like fridges in there, kettles, that sort of thing, to sort of make it a little more comfortable while people are staying there. So whatever the experience somebody has, good or bad, we always go back to investigate. So I think we recently had somebody feedback to us on one of our properties. The service manager, Vicky, went out to that property to double check to see what the issues were. And sometimes it has meant that we have redecorated the property, we've made some changes to what we do. So we do, the experience of residents really is important to us. It does feedback to us. We've had properties where we've had like major issues around damp and mould, and the team have gone, this is not suitable. We've handed it back and said, we can't use this as temporary accommodation anymore. So we really care about the standards that are in there and the experiences of our residents in there. So we will constantly be checking that in, and the team do a huge amount of inspections in our properties on a regular basis. So they're constantly in and out of our units.
Yeah, please go again.
Yeah, but there's still, it's hard to tell from the report and from your answer whether there's an issue with landlords having bad experiences and then just going, actually, no, this isn't worth it. Because, like I say, there's all sorts of people who rent, and it isn't only social housing that is this issue, private renters has this. But I also know examples where that has happened.
Well, for the landlords on our Central Suffolk letting scheme, we manage the properties. So we've got a tenancy management officer, tenancy sustainment officer. We do inspections regularly in those properties, and we manage them very, very closely. So it's very rare they have a bad experience. where situations where the tenancy is breaking down, we will step in. You know, we do step in. We're quite intense in that aspect of that, and because we're trying to manage the relationship with the landlord, but also manage that tenancy for that resident. And sometimes it's not a good placement for that particular tenant. So we look at what the options are. So we've got complex case officers that can come in and step in and work with everybody. And then we always find a solution for that individual, because if it's not working in that setting, we will find them another setting that better suits them. And sometimes that may mean we take them back into temporary accommodation. So on the whole, from the landlord's perspective, because we're so involved, especially if you're a Central Suffolk Lettings landlord, because we're so involved, because we're in those properties and we're working with everybody, because we're trying to keep them in the tenancies as much as we can. But where it's not working, we're very quick to come up with options for people. So on the whole, landlords very rarely leave because they've had a bad experience with a tenant that we've placed in their property. That's not a common occurrence at all.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'll just come in there before Councillor Grandin, if I may. We can see from the paper that the cost of B&Bs is 150 to 200 a night. Is that the cost that it costs the council, or is there a sort of net cost, you know, is part of that funded, or how does it work?
That's a gross cost across the different types of hotels that we use. So we use the Cedars, we use the Cop Dock, and we also sometimes have to use travel lodges. So it varies. So that's an average. But we are able to sort of claim that back, some of that back through housing benefits. Obviously, if it's a travel lodge hotel, we don't get as much back for it, so we lose quite a lot on a travel lodge placement. When it's let me get this right, the Cedars and the Cop Dock Hotel, we tend to almost get 100% of the money back. So
it might not be quite as costing quite as much as the numbers in here.
No, obviously we do the initial layout because we pay for that, and so because we sort of block book the hotel room, so it goes out before we get the money back.
Okay, thank you. And on finding landlords for CS Suffolk Central Suffolk Lettings, is there any scope for going to court eviction hearings and approaching landlords that might be ready to have Mid-Suffolk or Babergh manage their lettings?
I would hope that we would get there before we're in court, because we do early intervention work. So from the moment a landlord is looking to, say, evict their tenant, we are usually there talking to them, mediating and negotiating. And
but sorry, Emma. I mean, private sector landlords, not part of the Central Suffolk Lettings. I mean, a completely private landlord, and to approach them to try and get them to come over to as a new landlord to Central Suffolk Lettings.
The only problem with that is we'd expect the property to be vacant. That's the only problem with it. But as I was saying before, though, I would hope that before we even get to court, we'd be having that discussion with the landlord before we got to court. So if they're not on CSL already, what we would do is we would talk to them before, whilst they were trying to go through the process of evicting their tenant at the very beginning, and have those conversations. And that would be something that we will sometimes pay additional money for them to keep the tenant. So we would look to see what would be the best option for that situation, and that might be to talk to them about Central Suffolk Lettings to see if that's something they would be interested in as well. So we never rule anything out.
So in nearly every case, we would be involved in that process anyway. Yeah. So okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't seem to notice much mention of housing associations in this paper. When you're talking about lettings, are you including housing association property as well in this? And if not, how do they fit in with our schemes?
The answer is yes, we do include them as well. We do include that in part of our outcomes and who we let to, so they're part of that. They're on Gateway to Home Choice, and so it's for us. It's part of the offer.
Councillor Jameson.
Thanks, Chair. When you say there's a mismatch between the affordable one-bedroom, between the affordable housing available and the affordable housing being in the pipeline, is that, when you're securing one-bedroom apartments, is there on the new developments, is there no new developments? Are they just not building one-bedroom houses? Do you have a say in any new developments that are coming through on what's required?
We have an ask, as always, with our developers. What we found whilst doing this report and pulling the data together was that in Babergh we had no approvals of Section 106 affordable housing properties come through in 25-26, which shocked us. We thought it was going to be low, but we didn't realise it was zero. So that's highlighted for us. That's obviously something that we need to look at to try and turn around. But for the strategic housing team, whenever they get any planning applications that come across or developers come to them and RPs come to them as well, they often do say, we do need one beds. We're constantly having that conversation with them. But what we have to remember is that anything that comes through is based on the current plan as it stands at the moment, the local plan as it stands at the moment. And that's based on the data at the time, which said we needed 2-bedroom properties. But we do try and do a snapshot of what the current need is. And the problem is with one beds, it's trying to convince developers and RPs that this is something that they need to be providing, because for them there are issues around management and that sort of thing. Because we tend to be quite low density single units, it tends to be harder in that sense, but we're constantly having that conversation with them to say, this is what we need, can we get some delivered? So that conversation is ongoing in the background.
Okay, thanks. So when you say Babergh had none in the last year, does that mean no affordable housing at all, or just no one-bedroom? Sorry.
No affordable housing at all.
Oh, right, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a lot from the new Prime Minister about his wish, and he's stated it a lot of times before, his wish to eradicate homelessness, which obviously is a very ambitious target, but one we should strive to try and achieve. If this is a priority for the new government, I know that we've had increases over the last few years with homelessness funding from central government, but do you think that there will be further larger increases in that funding in forthcoming years? Because without it, I don't see how you're actually going to prevent homelessness.
I think it's very hard to say, but if government wants to sort of eradicate homelessness as the wish seems to be, you can't do that without money. But it's not just about money. You've got to create a market where housing is supplied in the way where people want to live, in the types of housing that people want to live in, and make it accessible for people to gain access to properties as well. Because it's not just a money issue. It is also an issue of how that market is structured and what homes are being delivered where and when. And I think there has to be a focus on social housing, because I think affordable housing isn't always affordable. And I think because of the way affordable is currently framed as 20% of market rent, and affordable can be shared ownership, discount market housing. So because that waters it down even more in that sense, I think it's about refocusing what you mean by like affordable or social housing, and maybe getting more social housing. And I know that, you know, the focus of Homes England at the moment is to get more social housing built, and the focus is there, but I think it just needs to be a little bit more. And I think it's, so there's a lot, I think there's lots of different levers need to be pulled in order to get us on the right pathway.
Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. One of them is, the officer said that they were looking at other options for temporary accommodation. What options are being investigated? For example, what about modular building for single people, since we have so many of them? Those modular developments, such as have been built in Cambridge, and I think they've been also used in one of the Norfolk prisons, I'm not sure, which is a very unfortunate association. However, they provide a temporary solution when somebody is sofa surfing or in very unpleasant B&B situations. And are you looking at things like possible caravan parks, that sort of thing? So what options are you looking at? Or have you been?
We have considered modular housing in the past. It tends to be a little bit more contentious. A lot of local authorities do use it. I know Ealing have done it, Redbridge have done it where I've worked before. Done it in Chelmsford myself. I think it's always about the land, having the available land, and it goes through the planning process. Not always, residents aren't always happy when you mention modular units in temporary accommodation, but they are options, and it's something that we have looked at in the past, and we're always reconsidering our options in that aspect to see whether that's a possibility for doing. But that's still also caveated by budget. I mean, we've also considered looking. We currently use we have a small proportion of our own properties that we use as temporary accommodation from our own stock, so we can look to increase that. That's one option that we've got open to us. So there are those sorts of things, and I think one of the things we look at is how we can better leverage the housing register to move people on, you know, looking at households that are stuck in temporary accommodation. I think at the moment it's 1 in 3 lets now go to those who are currently in temporary accommodation, and it depends on the length of time as well. So we are looking at different levers and options. You know, we will explore everything and look at our options. We're still doing that at the moment, just to see what we can do in terms of managing the cost and keeping it sustainable to provide temporary accommodation, because it has to be, you have to keep it affordable and sustainable, and it has to be efficient as well and still be of good quality. So we do consider modular units. We are going to be looking at, could we look at some of our own stock, putting more of that into temporary accommodation provision. So we are looking at that. In terms of caravan parks, not too keen on them because they're still not ideal accommodation. And usually they've got planning restrictions where you can't live there for the whole year and you have to move out. So that has its own complexities. But, you know, we will look at opportunities as they come up.
Thank you. My second question was actually to Councillor Hendry. To what extent, one of the issues has been, I recall from so many meetings in the past, it was, oh, well, we want 2-bedroomed houses built, not 1-bedroomed. And there are several reasons why 2-bedroom houses are often seen as an ideal. For single people to some extent, because where family breakdown has occurred, for proper visitation rights for the person, usually the male partner has had to move out because of family breakdown, in order to have proper visitation rights, they have to have a separate bedroom for child or children involved. So, you know, it's not always, oh, this is a single person, but they sometimes need a 2-bedroom house as well. But anyway, that being beside the point, to what extent are you working with the planning department and the JLP working groups to influence the drive towards a better mix of one bedroom and two bedroom? I know it's difficult with developers, but from the point of view of putting it into the JLP.
We have commissioned, we're in the process of commissioning a report that's a housing needs assessment that will speak to what they need.
Emma,
oh, sorry.
The question was to the councillor. If you just
sorry.
That's all right. I mean, it's difficult when you can't see us, isn't it? Yeah. Firstly, your point about two bedrooms, homes, and visitation. It's not always the case, because actually we can only provide a bedroom for a child if they have. Emma will probably be able to correct me on this. I think it's over 50% of the time. So only one parent is allowed that. So if for example, you had a single man who wanted his children, unfortunately they wouldn't be entitled to that under social housing rules. But as far as the JLP goes, I know there's been a lot of work. Robert Feeks and Strategic Housing do a lot of work with the planning department, looking at the JLP to see how we can get that mix of housing. I know we've got a potential development coming up in Sudbury, which is going to be one-bedroom properties. And I think, certainly from my point of view, it's the developer pushback. They don't want one-bedroom flats on their estates. But I think Robert does a great job of that communication with the developers and working with the housing associations, because sometimes the housing associations don't always want one-bedroom flats either. So it's about keeping those lines of communication open, but certainly it's something that we would like to reflect in the JLP going forward. So
I just want to come back on the bedroom. The policy is very clear on this. There has to be we do an assessment, and it's on a case by case. So it will depend on whether or not, as Councillor Hendry did point out, if they were sharing 50% custody, if there was a formal agreement in place. So it's not a blanket policy. There is scope to look at that. But we also have to consider affordability as well. They have to be able to afford that home as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting, all of that. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Just some additional points. Fundamentally, our challenges at the moment are that there is not enough development of any type going across both districts. And the alleviation and the pressure on the system comes from bringing in that new housing. So from my perspective, we need to be an attractive place for developers to want to build, and then for us to talk to them about the right type of homes. Single homes are not viable for the majority of developers. They just don't work financially. And so they become the last option that people put onto development. So our job is around the system. How do we bring that additional housing into our area? How do we make it, this is where people want to build and develop? You'll have seen that the whole of the construction industry at the moment is slowing down. The volume of homes coming through across the whole country is reducing. So from our perspective, whilst the JLP is really important, having a plan needs to be incentivising those developers to come and work here. And that's a challenge because, from a resident perspective, if you're living in an existing village, there's been a general pushback to additional development around those areas. So we need to find a way that manages our existing communities with the need for those additional homes. And that's something as a council that we won't be just doing in housing. That's across the whole council to be able to do that effectively. But that certainly will start to alleviate the pathway that we talk about is moving people through. Thank you.
Councillor Hendry just wants to say something, then we'll go straight to a break because that'll be 11 o'clock. So this will be the last. And then Councillor Carruthers, I will take your question in the new session.
I just wanted to agree. I think Kerry made some good points there. You can see from the figures in this, we need all types of housing. I think, although we need to have that push towards trying to obtain more one-bedroom properties, we mustn't let the other tenures fall by the wayside either. We basically need more homes. We need 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. We need bigger properties because we've got, although the numbers are smaller, we've got several families that are waiting for larger properties that have a hugely long wait because we just don't have properties like that available. So I think we just need to remember that we're desperately in need of all types of accommodation. I think, you know, we need to keep that in mind as well. So.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Carruthers, we will pick this up after the break. Thank you. Right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome back. We're in the questioning part of the agenda. So it's next up is Councillor Carruthers, and we're talking about bringing in new housing or availability, I think, but please ask your question.
Thank you. No, my question is about the need for one-bedroom accommodation. And I was wondering what's the age range of people in need of this, and whether there's a higher percentage of elderly people, or is it across the board? Because obviously, considering the demographic of this area, we've got quite a large older population, and whether there's a need for some kind of supported one-bedroom accommodation for older people.
I'm not sure if Emma's back with us, but I'll get a word in before she gets in. My understanding is it's principally younger men, so this is not elderly customers. So I'm looking at Emma's eyes just so that she gives a bit of time to get back up to speed. But no, it is single men, generally speaking, as I understand it. But Emma, do you want to come in and either corroborate or tell me that I've got it completely wrong?
No, Kerry, I think that is about right, because that's what we're seeing. It's not so much older people, it is predominantly young men that we're finding under 35. The average age of the people in RTA waiting for accommodation is about 33 years old. That's what we found. So it's that number. So it's that demographic of young men predominantly that need accommodation. And some of it is about supported housing, because some of them have complex needs and need additional support till they're ready to move into general needs housing.
Councillor Grandin.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about encouraging or supporting people to move to smaller accommodation when they're in a larger property. But are you also supporting or encouraging people who may no longer need a tenancy with us to move to the private sector when their economic position has changed or their home situation has changed, that they would no longer be a sort of priority need perhaps, or simply they now are quite comfortably off financially. So would we encourage them to move to the private sector to free up homes for other families who may have a greater need?
We don't do that as a rule, because it's a secure tenancy and it's for the tenant to decide if they wish to move out due to the change of their circumstances. It's very rare. I have seen it happen, but it's very rare. We can't, because it's a secure lifetime tenancy, we cannot do anything to make them move. You can have discussions with people about what their options are. If they start that conversation with you, and that's something that we can sometimes pick up. I know that we did a good programme about getting to know our residents and our tenancies. Then we're going to be doing more tenancy audit checks. We get to know people a lot more better and understand their circumstances. And I am a great believer in, when you talk about housing options, it's not just social housing. It's that whole spectrum of, shared ownership is an option, buying a home is an option, private rented is an option. So we're happy to have those conversations when and if people come to us.
Councillor Jameson.
Thanks, Chair. So you may have answered this earlier, so sorry if you have. But if a developer says we're not prepared to build one bedroom because it's not viable, we're going to build two or three, what's stopping us saying, okay, build two, but we're going to put two individuals in that two-bedroom property? Or is there anything stopping us doing that? Or
the issue is how you manage them. Social housing, we're not really designed to do shared housing in that sense, because they're just very messy to manage. They're much more difficult to manage as a as an option, so we tend not to do them because we offer secure tenancies. And so unless people are in a partnership relationship, it tends to be really hard to do joint tenancies, because if you're talking about two unrelated adults living together, having a social housing tenancy together, it creates some administrative issues and problems for them when they're trying to move forward. I have seen it in the past where local authorities have done joint tenancies with siblings, and it's okay when it first starts, but then as people's lives move on, they get partners, they have children, it then becomes very messy. And if you don't have the stock for people to move on to, it then becomes very difficult, because then you get constrained by what you have. It's just not an easy ask for us. We're not designed for shared housing and social housing. We do it in our temporary accommodation. When we use our own properties for temporary accommodation, we do that, but we just don't do it in general needs.
Well, I mean, it happens in the private sector, doesn't it, quite easily? So,
yeah.
And if it's a case of people not having homes or us making it difficult for us, is there not a way we could work around it? Something like that?
I think it's more difficult because when you get a secure tenancy, you get the right to buy as well. And my experience of those types of tenancies is that it's been extremely messy. And it doesn't add to the quality of lives of the individuals that end up in that situation, because sometimes they do get trapped in that property. So it becomes really difficult, especially if their relationship breaks down and it doesn't work.
Just to add to that, the private sector has a fundamental difference to what we manage in terms of social housing, which is choice. If you're in a private sector home and that's not working out for you, you will generally have an opportunity to be able to move and find something. Now that comes with our secure tenancies give people that security, but it doesn't always give them the choice or the ability to move around on a regular basis. I think I'd also point out the fact that given the lack of supply of affordable social rented homes within our area, in order to be successful in achieving, becoming a tenant, the complexity of need in order to get onto that register and be successful is significant. And so putting people together who have already got complex needs, who often need further support or, I guess, from the system, as Emma said, does not generally deliver good outcomes for those residents. So I think one of the things I will talk about maybe a little bit later on is some of the work that we're doing to try and understand this as a system, because what we're talking about is individual things, but in reality what we're saying is we've got people with housing need. We don't have enough available homes that are suitable for them within the district. That supply isn't coming through. The accommodation we've got, and using Travelodge as an example, is too expensive and it's costing us money and it's delivering really poor, I say really poor, it's delivering suboptimal outcomes for residents. It's not good for people to live in there. You don't deal with that by doing one or two things. You need to look at the entire system. And so Amma and I and the rest of the team have committed to portfolio holders, certainly around the temporary accommodation piece and voids, which is, I think, a contributing factor, to go away and look at that as a system piece of work and bring that back. And I think that may well be something that we can bring back to overview and scrutiny at some point in response to this piece of work. But it's a really complex challenge, I suppose, to be able to meet those needs. I don't know whether that adds any context, but it's difficult.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
I was wondering how much kind of not just the housing stock, but like the whole development can play into it being difficult to house people. Because in my ward, there's a road that hasn't been finished for years, and it means that it's not accessible and it doesn't meet people's needs. And yeah, so do we know how much there are issues with, even when there's been houses built, then development hasn't been finished, so it then isn't suitable for people to move into?
Are you talking about, Councillor Roy, you're talking about the infrastructure? So I suppose it's things where, you know, a new train station is promised or schools are promised, and then we build the houses first and then those come later. Is that what you're asking?
I'm talking about basic things like the road. So there's a development where the drop curbs don't actually meet the surface of the road because they haven't finished it, basically, and I have no idea when they're going to. And I have seen elsewhere on newer developments, basically houses there, people have moved in, but the roads haven't even been finished, let alone schools and GPs and all the other things people need.
Emma, I'll take that one if you like. I don't think that's a significant issue for the type of housing that we're talking about today. I think if you're purchasing a home, that clearly is a challenge. From our perspective, looking at both, I've worked in both the housing association sector now and local authority. When we're purchasing homes on those developments, we're a bit more robust at making sure that the development gets finished. But I don't think with the housing supply issue that is preventing people moving into them. It clearly causes dissatisfaction. It does impact residents in terms of impact on cars, ability to access pavements and what have you. But in terms of people getting homes, I don't think it's having a significant impact. I don't have any evidence to be able to support that, but I don't see that being mentioned in the types of conversations that we're having with residents that are on our housing list.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Scarf. We want to, in our minds as well at this stage, start thinking about any recommendations that we might have been sort of thinking about or developing, but we're still in questions. So, Councillor Scarf.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple, actually. Probably to the head of housing, actually, I would suspect would be the right person to answer them. I wanted to broaden that a little bit because we're concentrating on a couple of areas, obviously, with obvious reasons as to why we're doing that, but it's a very broad report that you brought forward here today, so I was going to ask something about something else. With the minor adaptations grants that it mentions, and they seem to be going really well now, we've increased the grant up to 15,000, because a few years ago it was a bit restrictive. It mentions the economics are really compelling, but the cost savings accrue to National Health Service and adult social care. Adult social care is run by the County Council, not this council, and obviously the NHS is a national thing. So how do we square that circle? I think unitaries will help because we, as a unitary going forward, will be responsible for adult social care and housing, and there'll be a crossover element. But how do we look at or encourage cross-budget work, perhaps, for example, from within the NHS? That's the first one. And then there's on page 5, it says future assurance members should accept and lists a number of points where we're doing work. It's going to progress through quarter 1, quarter 2, etc. And it talks about those reports going forward. Are those reports going to portfolios only, or portfolios and cabinet only, or scrutiny, or the wider membership? How are you going to disseminate that so we can monitor what you're doing and what you're progressing, what your work programs are?
Okay. I think your first question is about how do we square the circle around funding. For the disabled facilities grant, which is where we get our money from, it comes from the Better Care Fund, which comes from health, which is given to county, and county get an overall budget, and then we get a slice of that of districts and boroughs to carry out disabled facilities grant. So we're already doing that piece of working together in shared funding. We're currently doing some work around looking at what does the future look like, how can we better deliver to get those better outcomes for residents and be more joined up, so that piece of work is constantly happening. We work with our colleagues in county to look at delivery. So as part of the independent living service, which covers the GFD grant, actually county is the front door for that across all the districts and boroughs in Suffolk. So county provides a front door for us in terms of everything comes through them, and then they triage it back to us in the districts and boroughs. So we're already doing that, a lot of close working, but it could be better. I think it's we know that there is an issue around awareness because not everybody in a hospital knows that you can get a GFG grant to get in a stair lift, and so we're constantly having to do that communication piece and work on how we spend the money in terms of the Better Care Fund as a whole, so that we get that joined up approach for helping our residents as well. So I hope I've answered that question. And then in terms in the future, we're very much basing on what happens with the council housing assurance report, which feeds into the quarterly reporting that happens within the council around our performance, so that hopefully every quarter there will be a report that everybody will see, and then you can monitor our performance and how we're performing across the piece, and not just waiting for a yearly outcome.
Can I add to that, Chair, just to give a bit of context, because so in terms of DFG, it's probably worth being clear, I suppose, the difference between the DFG and the adaptations that we spend on council homes, because there are separate budgets. So just to give some clarity around that, DFG is principally for private sector household adaptations. So just for members, really, just to be clear, within the report there is a differential. But there is opportunity, even now, I think, and in the future, to work across the system. I've certainly worked in other areas where identifying savings, and I think we mentioned at the break, Councillor Scarth, in a previous employment, where Public Health invested £2 million in repairs to alleviate the implications of damp and mould. I think if you can create business cases that generate really clear savings for others in the system, there is an opportunity to create that funding. But I think at the moment it's more challenging with the different tiers of council. I think unitary will add some benefit to that, but that still excludes the likes of the NHS, criminal justice, and those others in the system. But we will continue to look at working with our partners. In terms of reporting, I think from my perspective, both on the council housing assurance report, but also this, whilst this gives an element of kind of performance stats, there's a lot of work we want to do in terms of moving the system forward. And I think whilst we'll bring those numbers back, what I'm hoping to do is develop that report to give some real insight, not only into what we're finding, but what we're doing about it, and the real key benefits and the outcomes that we're striving for. So I'm hoping that whilst you get all of that stuff, this report at the front end tells you, if you read nothing else in the report, these are the things that you must go away with. We want to create some real insight for members to be able to go, these are the things we need to hone in on. So you'll see this report. It will evolve. This was our first stab, really, at bringing that back. So that will come back through a variety of different methods. So portfolio holders, definitely, yes, cabinet, but I fully expect that the wider council will get to see our performance reporting with that insight and context to bring it to life slightly more. So hopefully you won't be unsighted on the good stuff that Amma and her team will be leading on.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Grandin, and then I think we'll head into debate after that, unless there's any more questions. But Councillor Grandin.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that the secure tenancy agreement creates a very static situation in allowing people to move on one way or another, and creates a almost like in a hospital situation, you call it bed blocking, so I don't know what you would call it here, where people are not encouraged to move to other situations. And I wondered whether the secure tenancy agreement is a national policy, or whether there's anything that we can do to create different options of tenancy agreements that would then be a bit more flexible for both us and for the tenants.
I mean, secure tenancies is the general rule of thumb when it comes to council housing. We do have the ability to consider fixed term tenancies, and we have done this in the past. However, these are very difficult to manage, and they were introduced almost more than a decade ago, almost now, showing my age. But it's people, social landlords tend not to use them, because what happens then is it becomes very administrative. Because if you say you've got a 5-year fixed tenancy, I'm going to review that in 5 years' time, see where you are. You're then actually creating a new problem, because then you're going to have to find somewhere for these residents to move to. And so it just becomes very administratively very burdensome to do. As with anything, there are always unintended consequences. So there is the option for fixed-term tenancies. However, over time, a lot of people have chosen not to use them in the first place, or if they have brought them in, they're not using them now. I know a lot of housing associations did bring in fixed-term tenancies, and they've dropped them because it's just very, very complicated. You know, it just makes it really complicated. Yes, some security, and also you have to think of it this way: it's people's homes. It gives people security of tenure. You know, the idea that we're giving you a home. However, people can move if they so choose to. It's just maybe we need to be better at communicating that to residents, making them aware of the options to move, and maybe perhaps doing that bit of having that change in the culture around our homes, about looking at, you know, this is my home and I stay in there, and when I no longer need it, these are the options for me. I can downsize, I can move. It's very much that people know that if they need a bigger home, they know exactly what to do. So I think we need to be better at changing that culture around when you need to downsize a little bit more, and be more vocal about that a little more. Because on the housing register, you do get additional priority to move to a smaller home. So we do need to work on that offer a little bit more.
Yeah, just like to add to that, I think especially around downsizing. I mean, I'm a big fan of secure tenancies. I think, you know, being a social housing tenant myself, I think having that security, you know, I've got friends who privately rent, and they can never really put down roots. They're constantly moving from place to place, and I think it's really important that we do have that security when we're renting from either, you know, housing association or the council. But certainly, I know that I've been discussing this with Amma and Robert and other members of housing, because I do think we need more incentives and more awareness, as Amma said, about the possibility of downsizing. Some people aren't aware. I've been through the downsizing process. It's quite complicated. So that's certainly something we're going to be looking into, is not necessarily incentivising, but seeing what we can do to make the whole process easier for our tenants, and making sure that they're aware that they can do it, because as Amma said, you know, you get priority. If you're giving up a larger house for a smaller house, you get priority. So there's a lot of things we can do to encourage that within the system, I think.
Well, it's interesting that you said it's quite complicated. It should be simple and encouraged, and it should be made really easy for someone to downsize, so that they will see, yeah, I don't need to manage this big house anymore. And whatever the administrative aspect should be made simple for them to do, rather than, as you mentioned, complicated. Because then it would free up properties for those that truly need that size or that type.
I agree, Catherine, and I think, you know, I think everyone has different. It's looking at the reasons that prevent people from doing that and seeing what we can do to help. Because sometimes it's the upheaval, you know, it's the moving costs, the decorating costs. What can we do to make that whole process easier for the tenants? So, but yes, it's certainly something that I'm very keen on looking at. So.
Thank you, Councillor Grandin, and I think you're touching on a recommendation there, if you wished. Like, I think you've sort of hit a recommendation point. Councillor Bradbury.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is probably going to be quite a difficult one, and I was just thinking, what's the biggest single constraint preventing us from reducing B&B use, and what's the most effective action which the council and us as councillors can do to try and remove that? I mean, I know it's very hard to sort of get that down, but I mean, even something that, if there's one thing that the council could do, what do you think we could actually do
I'll take that, Emma, because I think, thank you, Councillor, if that's okay. But there's no one thing, because if it was, we'd have done it. So the one thing is really to support, I guess, the team. When we go, we talked earlier in the, around the piece of work that we're doing to look at the overall system. Our job is to bring back the size of the challenge, the options to be able, where we can pull, create leverage to improve our system, and then I guess the challenge there is for members to support that in order, and then to monitor and hold us to account in delivery of those outcomes. But as I say, I think there are a suite of maybe the top 5 things that I think we have to do. We have to be, so the voids process needs to improve, and that starts with a number of things. A, we need to manage our tenancies so that the standard of the void that we get back from our tenants is vastly improved, and therefore those voids don't require significant work to be done on them. Secondly, we need to make sure we're investing in our stock on a regular basis. So if we know they're not in good state or they're non-decent, that we invest in them so that our residents have got a good quality home that they can hand back to us in that state. Secondly, we need in an efficient and effective way for us to manage those voids and to turn them around quickly and efficiently, but also to give them back to a resident to set that tenancy up for a success. If you know what it's like, if you walk into a room and it's well presented and well looked after, you will look after it. If you walk into a room or a home that is less well presented, you're less incentivized in order to do that. And I think that, so in terms of, and then to get them let. So that voids process of making sure that we have fewer homes within our stock empty at any one time is a critical thing. Secondly, it's making sure that Emma's team has got the appropriate resource to be able to manage that whole pathway. These are individual relationships we are having with our tenants and residents to help them at probably their, one of the most challenging times in their lives. And, whereas housing management, we might see our residents on a very intermittent basis, our clientele that come through the Amers area can quite often take up, a day of an officer's time to be able to support them and help them. So we need to make sure we've got adequate resource, and that's something we're looking at. And then the third thing is to do the piece of work that says, look, the world has changed. The demand that we're seeing on our system is greater. How do we best utilise the resources we've got, both in terms of financial investment, it may be in new accommodation or other suitable accommodation, but also how do we move people through that pathway quicker so that they do get to the point where, actually picking up on Councillor's comments earlier on about how do we get them out of their secure tenancy, that's around aspiration and choice and being able to get them to want to move to somewhere and to be able to afford it because we've supported them in that position, not feeling that they have to move out where they're giving up a secure tenancy, which is the fundamental principle of what we deliver here. And it's part of the reason the changes have been made to the Renters' Rights Act is to give people security and not having landlords turfing people out on the street without notice. So I am mindful of making sure we've hit the right balance, but there is a lot that we need to do. We will bring that back between now and probably the end of the year with a sense of what do we think that needs to look like between now and the next 12, 18 months.
Thank you, Chair. Coming back to what the Officer Theobald is saying, it strikes me, I recall what we had in the heritage planning training, the heritage training the other day, where it was taking 26 parts of a process and turning it to 9 parts of a process, which was very good work. I expect that's what you're trying to look at the moment. But one of the things which is possibly coming towards a recommendation here.
Do we go into debate and recommendations
yes,
on that,
fine,
and then you can carry on saying what you're saying, but we'll move into debate because we've had the questions. So please.
Right, so I just think that based on what's been said by officers and Councillor Hendry today, it's reassuring to hear, although it's not ideal, that fixed-term tenancies are a possibility. And I'm wondering, should we not look at those for some of these single men in putting them potentially into house shares with support and putting the added layer of support in place, so that, yes, they won't then say, 2 or 3 years down the line that there's that we've got to change situation, and that we're in a secured tenancy and I want to buy, and that sort of thing. Is there not? I really think that needs to be looked at very closely as a possibility to remove people in B&B and having short-term tenancies available in essentially council house shares.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, Councillor Rowe.
Yeah, I'm like Councillor Hendry I think like secure tenancies are like really important because it's a major part of people's lives. They become part of the community, and kind of even having a possibility that you can just randomly be told, oh yeah, you need to up sticks and your whole life needs to suddenly change, is a really horrible situation, and it's one that I've been through at a really horrible part of my life. Having that security has wide benefits of people's well-being and how our communities work and everything. And so I think we need to not lose sight of kind of the wider bit. It's not just kind of, someone can move somewhere else and it's a like-for-like situation. And for the multiple occupancy, with HMOs, it was interesting what Emma said. So I've slightly changed my mind on it a bit, because it sounds like for some people it does work, but we also need to be mindful that it does mean people have less privacy, and I know particularly for potentially people from the queer community, there kind of could be concerns, and it's been in where people have been in B&B situations, that lack of privacy, and then kind of dynamics, and like Emma says, it's difficult to manage sometimes. So I wouldn't be rushing into doing it. It's something which we can consider, but we need to bear in mind kind of privacy and kind of all sorts of bits that lead to people's mental health, supporting people's mental health, I suppose.
So if people want to talk in debate about that fixed tenancies against secure, then that would be quite interesting. So this has been a really good paper that we've had. There's a lot of information in here, and I think the questions have been excellent. Really, it's very hard with this paper not to focus on the homelessness relief performance, because that's such a big part of this. But we've heard how it's a very serious issue, and it's on a short timeline. But we've heard how people are on top of what's causing that and what they need to do. It seems like there's a lot of aspects to this that are very much beyond our control, with supply of one-bedroom houses or any houses that we need. We've had questions on downsizing, funding, voids, HMOs. We've covered ever such a lot of different subjects in here. It's been absolutely excellent. I think there's a recommendation that's sort of floating around on fixed tenancies. There's also another one on downsizing and developing that culture. I think for me, one of the things that stood out for this paper was whether we need to have a recommendation. We have a council risk register, not the risk register that we have in the back of this paper, but an actual strategic risk register as opposed to a management risk register. And in there, this particular part is covered by SRR 018, which the council services may be unable to support demand during the cost of living crisis. And that's already a impact 3 and a likelihood 3 probable. And I do wonder if we need to look at the wording of that so that we actually state the B&B caseload in there, and maybe the decline of central Suffolk lettings, so that becomes a strategic concern. I'm not sure. I spent quite a while thinking about this, whether this actually ascends to a strategic thing. But I think the risk is there. The cost gets so incredibly high by the end of this that maybe it is something that we should be aware of on a strategic scale. But we can talk about that. But I'll go back to the floor. I won't go on and on. Who wants to speak next in debate? Councillor Rees.
May I just add something? I certainly agree with Councillor Rowe and everyone else. Secure tenancies are great. We need them. I'm not saying, I would not begin to say that we don't need them at all. I do just think that we need the added flexibility in this situation, in a crisis situation, which will, the idea of specifically using short-term fixed tenancies for single people who are in a time of their life which might change. As somebody who's been in this situation 2 or 3 times in my life, you then go on and do something else, and things do change, and it's the sort of thing that gives not only the council flexibility but the tenant flexibility as well in a short time span. Secondly, I think that something that's really worth noting is that the fantastic work that's done on the prevention of evictions and things, or some of that great prevention work, it would give an opportunity to perhaps extend that work into this very specific sector of a specific demographic going into these short-term tenancies, and perhaps helping them then in that fixed term to move on using the resources that are at present preventing. And so it's a question of consolidating out of a crisis situation into more secure and then something even stronger, if that's clear.
Yeah, I think that is very clear. So we're talking about a tool to, because we have to be careful in a crisis that we do have to do things that we necessarily wouldn't want to do to try and make it work. So I think that's definitely something that we should consider as a tool, but not as a blanket policy. Next, Councillor Grandin.
Thank you. I'd like to make a suggestion for a recommendation of being a little bit stronger on the encouragement for people to move to more suitable accommodation. But one thing I didn't ask earlier, and perhaps should have, or something that I haven't understood, is whether the secure tenancies secure a tenant in a particular property or just in local authority properties. And I'm not quite sure. Well, is it possible for me to ask that question now, please?
I don't know. A secure tenancy is usually for a particular property. However, in certain circumstances, say where if we're demolishing or regenerating a block, when that tenant has to move, that security when they get the new property, they'd keep their secure tenancy, and equally, if a tenant transfers, they'd move and they'd still be a secure tenant. So so it's not necessarily always about a property. It's the tenure that you actually have. So in that sense.
So that seems to me a flaw in the system, where the default is that they are secure in a particular property, rather than in the system where they will always be entitled to a property in the system. Because if someone is, say, living in a very large property and doesn't need it, they want to know that they're secure, and we would want them to be secure, that we will find them a suitable property for sure. But should it be right that they are secure in that individual property when they had 3 children living with them, or their parents were alive, or whatever? Should they still be in that property when they're one single person now? Because it's they're attached to that property, sort of thing.
It sort of flexes in both ways. It's to the property, but if that tenant then chooses to, say, downsize, they don't start off as an introductory tenancy in that one bed they move to. They're still a secure tenant. So it's security of tenure. That's the way I should have described it. It's security of tenure. You are a secure tenant. So if you choose to downsize, if you choose to move home, you will still be a secure tenant, but it's a weird thing. I'm not describing it really well. You've got security of tenure, so if that tenant moves, their security of tenure moves with them. However, if they choose to stay, they still have that security of tenure in that property. So it does sort of flex both ways. So if you move, you don't lose it, but because they've got security of tenure, you can't force anyone to move. You just can't.
It's not a disincentive for people to downsize before fear of losing that secure tenancy. So to be clear from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. So what we'll do now is, if Alicia wants to read out recommendations, and we'll go one by one, and if anyone has an issue with them, they can discuss it, and maybe we'll go to a vote on the particular recommendation after a bit more debate. Councillor Bradbury.
Forgive me, I'm not sort of 100% with the process of the particular meeting, but I was going to ask, could we ask officers to develop a targeted plan to increase the one-bedroom affordable supply? Through various, I've got notes here on negotiation and direct development, and that they could perhaps report back to us. I know with possible LGR changes, that's a long-term thing might be slightly awkward, but I'm just wondering if that is worth putting in as a recommendation.
Yeah, and Alicia will have taken that down, and we'll add that to the list, because it's difficult with this, because you almost, certain aspects of this, you almost need a blackboard in the corner saying, today this is exactly where we are, and this is exactly where we're going, because it is literally, it's something that can't really wait for a meeting and to do that, but it is being managed. It's been managed by very capable people. Councillor Rowe.
Yeah, I was going to think that I'd suggest something like that as well. Because we're going up to LGR and we don't know when, we have some idea when we'll be restrained on what we can budget for. That we look at what money can be put, what more money if we can put more money towards it. That Cabinet considers it basically as soon as it can to meet, so we don't get restrained by DLGR process. And also another recommendation is that it's really nice to see some of the accessibility bits on this report, like the red, amber, green, having R, A and G written in the things but it's really helpful when listening to it. And if there are other people who are colourblind, that was something I picked up on.
The other aspect is this, in this is, yes, we need like action on single houses, but also are the funds there to really incentivise landlords in central Suffolk lettings? I don't know. It's things are moving forward, but it's very difficult for both councils. But I don't think that's a recommendation as such. But it's just an observation that there's a lot of incentivising needs to go on to pull that number back. So, Alicia.
Thank you, Chair. So I have 3 recommendations that I've picked out for debate. We'll go through them one by one. The first one is about fixed-term contracts. I do just want to say, before I read out the recommendation, that a recommendation on fixed-term contracts was made by the Mid-Suffolk Committee about 2 years ago now, when we were scrutinising the HRA, and that was rejected by the Cabinet. But I appreciate that was a Mid-Suffolk only recommendation. This is a joint committee, it's in different circumstances, so I'm happy to put it again to a vote. So that recommendation I have as that the Cabinet members for housing explore the viability of introducing short-term and fixed-term contracts, as well as house shared tenancy agreements.
Like maybe for where appropriate. I don't know. It's difficult because I don't want that to be read later as everything should be fixed term, because that's not what we've said at all.
Yeah, I'm happy to put explore the viability of introducing a small number of short-term and fixed-term contracts, just to keep our scope quite limited in what we're looking for.
Do we want to talk about that before we vote on it?
I don't know whether you want to be a little bit more prescriptive, because I think you talked about a specific cohort as well, and someone mentioned 2 years. I don't know if you want to be a little bit more prescriptive around that.
The thing is, it does help immensely to add the detail at this stage, because quite often these things take a little while to actually get there, and you look at them 6 months later and you're like, what were we actually asking for? But also at the same time, we don't want to go too... We don't want to be too absolutely detailed on it, because we're not making a plan. So we could add some more detail for if the committee would like that.
Yeah, I'm happy to defer to Councillor Rees, since this recommendation did come as a suggestion from her. From an officer perspective, though, I think on this recommendation, I'd quite like to keep it open to allow housing to review it if it's a viable option. If so, who is it best beneficial for? But I'll let Councillor Rees come in.
I would suggest that it would be something like up to 5 years. But the thing is, certainly deferring to the people who are working on the front line with the people concerned, the residents concerned. So I would not want to prescribe, oh yes, it's got to be 2 years, or it's got to be 3, but maybe for between 2 and 5 years as possible options. But again, working with the agencies and the departments who are supporting people with the complex needs. And so it would be a question of, well, what would they think would be an appropriate length of time for those fixed terms, because they're working with helping people in a specific phase of their life to move on, and they're very much concerned about people in specific complex situations. So I would not like to be the person saying, oh yes, it's got to be 2 years, or I'm suggesting that it should be perhaps for up to 5 years, and then to see people through the second stage of their crisis, coming out of crisis, really, for a small number, so maybe up to 5 years. But I would obviously defer to the housing specialists who are dealing with this situation for the guidance on that.
We are kind of doing that by sending this recommendation, aren't we? So that happens. So would anyone like to speak on this? Councillor Grandin.
I'd just like to ask whether we'd be allowed to have such a fixed-term contract in light of the changes in the law in May.
Well, that could be an answer to the recommendation that it's not possible. But for now, I think we'll carry on with it, and if it's not possible, that's the reply we'll get. Would anyone else like to speak on this? Councillor Scarf?
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult issue because we're opening up, I think, future problems for housing to deal with. In terms of if you don't have security of tenure, whatever that period of time is, and at the moment it's permanent, how do we deal with people when at the end of 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, and we say to them, okay, well, your time's up now? I just don't know how we're going to deal with it, and I think that's the reason why when Mid-Suffolk Scrutiny Committee put it forward, it was roundly rejected by the Cabinet, because I think we're setting ourselves up for a real problem in the future. Plus, with LGR now imminent, LGR will change things as well. So we're setting up potentially a policy, if the Cabinet was to agree to either Babergh or Mid-Suffolk, which the new unitary would go, well, that doesn't fit because we're merging more than one council together. So I think it's a real problem. I think what I would appreciate is if you're going to move a motion like that we have a separate vote for Babergh and Mid-Suffolk.
Councillor Carruthers?
Thanks. Yeah, I share the same concerns as Councillor Scarf, and it would create insecurity for people who are already going through a difficult time. So I'm not sure that it would it really help? I don't know. That's for the housing team to decide. The other thing I'm wondering about is with HMOs, are there properties available that could be converted into HMOs, or would it be a case that the councils would have to buy them through the whatever it was?
Well, I assume,
I don't know. I mean, all that would come out in their answer, I suppose.
I assume Central Suffolk Lettings could convince a landlord to change something into an HMO as part of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. And whilst not wanting to lead the committee, I'm conscious of what you're trying to achieve with the fixed term, but it has been around the loop, and it does seem that we're very close to asking for the same piece of work to be done again, albeit with the legislation change as well. I wonder whether the recommendation would be slightly wider, because I think the problem that we're trying to solve is how do we create enough suitable accommodation and a pathway for people to be able to move through, and what are the solutions of being able to move those people through. I would be much more comfortable as an officer because in taking a wider brief and be able to feed back that strategy of what are the things that we think we can do within the time constraints that we have around LGR, with the resources and the legislation the way we have it, that's going to make an impact on our residents soon, not in, I agree we need to get more one-bedroom homes, but if they're not already with shovels in the ground, that won't make any difference for years to come. Those residents are in the Travel Lodge today. So for me, it's what can we do? So for example, should we be buying more already built homes? Whether that's, and in fact, we've been looking at one only this week, a 5-bedroom home that had potential to become an HMO. How do we do those things more quickly with the funding that we've got, with the solutions, the resource? We talk about the prevention elements. There's elements there where actually stopping people becoming homeless, working with those landlords that are about to exit the market to say, no, let's work with you. What can we do? And I think if this committee was able to see a suite of recommendations that both would go to Cabinet, I think, and the wider council, I think that may give some comfort that we get to the right outcome without spending lots of time looking at solutions that perhaps have already been considered and discounted.
Right, okay, well, thank you. That's very helpful. I think what I'll do is I'll take this to the vote, this recommendation, and just see how it falls. We'll do it by a show of hands to see whether we carry on. Is everyone happy with what we're voting for? Yeah.
The fixed term contract one, yep. So I've made some tweaks based on feedback throughout that debate session. So it now reads that the Cabinet members for Housing explore the viability of introducing a small number of short-term and fixed-term contracts of up to 5 years, as well as house share tenancy arrangements.
Right, okay, so all in favour of that recommendation?
Yeah, do we want a separate Babergh vote and a separate Mid-Suffolk
Well,
vote?
I can sort of do that with the, when they put their hands up, I was thinking, but we can...
we would need, we need a proposer and a seconder from each council if we wanted to do it separately. Yeah.
Okay.
So if we do Babergh first, do we have a proposer for that from Babergh?
Right,
proposer,
Councillor Rees. Councillor Grandin.
And we'll go to a vote, I guess.
Yeah.
Votes in favour at Babergh? Against?
So that is tied. So I think we go with the status quo, which is not having a recommendation.
So technically in a tie, we would default to the chair of the committee, but Councillor McLaren as the chair of Babergh is not here, so it would default to Councillor Jameson as the vice chair of the committee, who would get the casting vote on that recommendation. Against, okay, that's fine. So that motion falls at Babergh. And then we would have to do the same for Mid-Suffolk. So do we have a proposer for Mid-Suffolk?
So that's fallen. Okay. Right, okay, let's sorry, I'll give you a chance to write that up.
Okay, so happy to move on through the list of recommendations. So recommendation 2, let me just save that. So recommendation 2, I have that this is from Councillor Grandin, what she introduced in debate, so that the Cabinet members for Housing, in partnership with the Director for Housing, create a system that encourages tenants to downsize properties where circumstances are appropriate. Yeah, absolutely. That the Cabinet members for Housing, in partnership with the Director for Housing, create a system that encourages tenants to downsize properties where circumstances are appropriate.
Yeah, sort of cultivating a culture of downsizing, maybe, if that helps, because encouraging tenants is a bit like, how do you do that? But it's almost like you want to make it a thing that's done. Yeah, Councillor Rowe.
I was going to say, not coming forward with encouraging, but given Councillor Hendry's experience, it sounds like there could be a, for those who want to provide, like being able to provide the information and kind of helping them to do it. So not assuming that people wouldn't ever want to do it. I know people, like, if they've had adaptations done to their homes, then they might worry about moving on. So, yeah, the helping facilitate where appropriate rather than encouraging might be better language. Because
it wants to be something people do, not like, at the moment it's not something people do. It's unusual. So, Councillor Bradbury.
Yes, thank you. I think going on to, I've forgotten who mentioned it earlier, I'm afraid, but just to make sure that the tenants aren't afraid they're going to lose their assured tenancy. Because I think if people, I'm going to move, I'm going to lose that. And as long as they are aware that they're not going to, I think that might help. Sort of a bit of publicity, or not publicity, but just to reinforce that, so then they're not going to feel concerned at that stage.
Yeah.
So that sort of includes a reassurance element of building that culture that we talked about.
So instead of saying that we create a system that encourages tenants to downsize, I can reword it to say that the Cabinet members cultivate a culture that both enables and supports tenants to downsize their properties where circumstances are appropriate.
So should we go for a vote on that? Well, we need a proposer. Councillor Grandin proposing and a seconder. Councillor Rees seconding. All in favour? That's unanimous.
Thank you, Chair. Then I just have one final recommendation for the moment. So this is based off Councillor Bradbury's contribution to debate. So that is that the Cabinet members for housing, again in partnership with the Director for Housing, develop a targeted plan designed to increase the supply of one-bedroom properties within both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk.
And so do we need to discuss how that would, because a targeted plan might be between portfolio holder and headed department or something like that, or is that a cabinet, something that would go in front of the cabinet, or are there any thoughts on?
No, that's beyond my level of expertise on that one, but it's just really, I thought, if people have got some sort of plan that could be put forward to both councils, then I thought, I mean, I know there probably is one, but as long as something's really visible for people, and it could be reported back, I thought that would be quite useful. Thank you.
Councillor Scarf.
I was just going to say, I think if you restrict it perhaps to the Cabinet member for housing, we're being too restrictive. Perhaps we should ask the Cabinet, because of course it affects planning issues as well. So it's the planning portfolio holder and the joint local plan, and it crisscrosses a number of areas. So perhaps we should ask the Cabinet rather than a specific Cabinet member.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I'll take that on board, Councillor Scuff, and I'll tweak that to say that the Cabinet as a whole.
Are we happy to have a proposer and a seconder? Oh, Councillor Rowe.
I was just wondering, because we've seen from the action tracker, things can take a little bit of a while, and with LGR, there is going to be a time when the national government will go, no, you're not allowed to put resources towards what you want to do. So I'm not quite sure how to word it, but basically having some plan rather than the most detailed plan, like a plan that we can do rather than a detailed plan that then ends up meaning we can't do it because it's taken too long, would be better. But how you can't do a interim plan, or so stuff gets done before LGR, makes it not possible.
Do we could we just put as soon as possible on that request, or do we want to ask for something that's a bit more macro?
So I can make it a little looser based on the time constraints that we're working with. So I can make it read that the Cabinet's explore developing a targeted plan designed to increase the supply, etc., which doesn't commit them to fully developing it as a whole while we're still here. Is that what you're trying to say? With LGR coming up, that we don't want to commit them to having to do a full, detailed plan in the next 12 months, but to at least have started?
Yeah, it's kind of, so there can be basically actions that can be implemented before LGR makes it more complicated. I'm trying not to word it in a kind of to circumvent national government, but we know there will be further constraints. So a plan of what we can feasibly, what a feasible plan before there are further constraints added by LGR.
Okay, yeah, so thank you, Councillor. I think I'm now on your train of thought.
Councillor Rees, I think, might want to just add something.
Thank you. Sorry. Given that the planning department has been mentioned, and the cabinet, the full cabinet members, given that anything that is in our JLP carries through, I believe, to when we have LGR, we don't have to worry too much about. These are things that are protecting our decisions into the future, really, aren't they? So, from the point of view of planning and everything, it's really important that the presumably the JLP working group would be involved as well. So anyway,
Thank you, Councillor Rees. So I've expanded the end of that recommendation to state that we wish to see some actions implemented ahead of local government reorganisation taking place. So we've kind of put the bare bones of a plan in place and we're actually actioning them and trying to secure things for the future, if that makes sense. So if I read out the whole recommendation as rewritten, it now reads that the Cabinet explore developing a targeted plan designed to increase the supply of one-bedroom properties within both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk, and seek to implement some of these actions ahead of local government reorganisation. If members are happy with that. Thank you, Chair. And that's all the recommendations that I had.
Well, I did wonder if
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to support that. I mean, I think with the reduced capacity of the central lettings, then I think that's a big risk, because who's to say that the landlords are not all going to pull out within the next 12 months? Then where would we be?
Yeah, exactly. I think it does pose a serious.
Maybe we can deal with it as a separate recommendation, but I think perhaps we could deal with it as part of this recommendation. I think we have to acknowledge as a committee the work that is going to be done on trying to retain landlords within Central Suffolk lettings. We also need to, I think, recognise the fact that we need to encourage more landlords in this unsecure time for landlords particularly to come on board with Central Suffolk lettings. So I think that, there's a recommendation there that we're pleased that work's being done, but we think that the work needs to be a real priority to recognise the fact that within a very short time we may not have any landlords within Central Suffolk lettings and the scheme would have failed. So it's something along those lines.
I'm quite happy for that to be one recommendation that covers the risk and that we pick out something.
It sort of makes sense, it sort of doesn't. So I've split it into two recommendations. So first recommendation I have is based on what Councillor Scarf has just put out about the Babergh and Scrutiny Committee recognises the work that has been undertaken to retain landlords under the Central Suffolk letting scheme, and requests that the Cabinet members for housing take this further as a priority. And then an additional recommendation.
Should we do that? Do the quick proposer in
if I
second,
read
or-
both,
No,
I'll read
okay.
both of them out in one go, and then we can do them as separate votes.
Yeah.
If that's okay. So the other recommendation is based on what you've suggested, Chair, in that the Cabinet members for performance and resilience explore further the risks associated with the decline in landlords engaging with Central Suffolk lettings, as well as the use of B&Bs for temporary accommodation. whichever way you want.
We'll do those two together on block. So do I have a proposal?
That is in the paperwork as a link rather than in paper copy.
To members for comments.
Happy to go to members for comments. I don't really have too many updates in that I'm doing all the chasing I can to get all the old recommendations on their progress as soon as possible, but quite happy that the recommendations that the committee made at July's committee, a nice handful of them are either already completed or are ongoing, which is a good sign. Yeah, trying to improve that relationship between Scrutiny and the Cabinet as much as possible, and that's moving in the right direction, which is hopefully coming forward in the action tracker.
Thank you very much. An overview and scrutiny work plan. We've got it in the papers. Do we have any comments from Babergh? Well, anyone's free to make comments on it, but particularly Babergh. No comments. Thank you very much. That's for noting. And Mid-Suffolk, the same question. No. So thank you very much. That concludes this overview and scrutiny meeting. It is about 12:30. So thank you very much for your time, and the next meeting of joint overview and scrutiny will be held on Monday the 14th of September at 10 a.m. and we'll be in the Frink room for that one. Thank you very much. Have a good